Thanks to everyone for joining us today. I know I'm excited to talk about building more modern web applications, serving the public better, building better Federalist federal websites with Federalist. So thanks again for joining us today. My name is David Corwin. I'm the lead engineer on Federalist. I joined in the fall. Before that, I was a consulting engineer for 18F. And before I joined government and TTS, I worked in a variety of consulting roles in software development, as well as scientific research, some back-end baking experience as well. So I've been a little bit all over the map, and I think that helps when building systems for folks, again, who are doing a lot of different things in their goal to serve the public. So I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat throughout the talk. So if there is a question that you have, I'll try to address it. If not, we'll make sure to get to a lot of those questions at the end of the talk as well. So yeah. Let's see here. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the web in general and the troubles that we have in building federal information systems to serve the public. We'll talk a little about some of the more recent things that have happened with the 21st Century IDEA. And we'll talk a little bit about Federalist. We'll do a quick demo and where you can go from there. And we'll talk about we'll hopefully have a lot of time for questions and answers, and I hope to get to all of those if we can. So the federal web. In general, deploying websites is complicated. It's a lot. It's not just writing a little bit of HTML that says hello world and putting it out there. You have to deploy this to the cloud. You have to make sure that it's resilient in the face of network challenges or DDoS attacks. You have to make sure that you can update it frequently, that it's accessible. So there's a lot that goes into just building websites on the technical side. In case I didn't catch everything, there are a few items that we need to be aware of. And this has nothing to do with just federal information systems. This is just, in general, it's hard. But deploying federal websites is even harder, of course. We have many more compliance requirements that we have to meet before we can actually put these websites up, that they have to satisfy. And while a lot of these probably are considered best practice for private websites, these are table stakes just to getting your website up. And a lot of acronyms here, of course, and Federalist doesn't necessarily help with all of these things, but it helps with the ones that we can, sort of leaving the ones that are specific to your subject area, whether it's your content and what you're trying to accomplish. That's still going to be up to you. More recently, the 21st Century IDEA was passed. That is the Integrated Digital Experience Act. And so this actually mandated that all of the executive branch agencies do a handful of things with their websites. They have to modernize them. Services and forms should be digitized. We should accelerate the use of e-signatures, try to improve our customer experience for the public, do some standardization and move to some more shared services, and comply with some website standards. Again, Federalist doesn't necessarily address all of these, but it addresses a lot of them. And in addition to not just Federalist, but certain ways of building websites in general that Federalist helps with, that we'll talk about a little bit. They go into a little bit more detail here when they talk about website modernization, 508 compliance, and making sure that websites and the information within them are accessible to everybody. Making sure that there's a consistent feel and presentation of that information, that it's authoritative, so there's one source for it, that the information is easily searchable, we're providing it in a secure way, and of course that this is a user-centered experience for the members of the public, that these things are customizable, mobile friendly. Again, Federalist helps with some of these. It does not help with all of them, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in detail. So let's talk a little bit about Federalist. There was no, a handful of years ago, there was no Federalist. 18F, which is more of a consulting agency within TTS, was working with a lot of federal agencies, and saw a lot of the same problems being solved over and over again. there are the technical challenges of building websites, deploying them, making sure they're secure, making sure they're compliant. And they're also, just the process-oriented things around that, what needs to get, all the steps that need to get done to make sure that we can get this up there, that we can make changes, that they get out to the public as fast as they can, that it's done in a secure way. And again, that we satisfy all the compliance requirements. And so out of all of these projects that 18F was seeing, they sort of built this platform, now called Federalist, to handle a lot of these things, to automate a lot of those processes, to make things a lot smoother for agencies who just want to get information to the public, who just want to allow us to do something. And that's sort of the origin here. And Federalist is sort of the tool that enables these workflows, that enables this to happen, but it also caters to a specific type of site. So in the private industry, we call the sort of websites that Federalist can support static sites, or the Jamstack is a very popular term these days. And they have a whole website and a whole organization behind it. This is a fairly technical description here, but basically what you're talking about here is we're generating the website ahead of time, most of it, all the content that we can. And so it's static, it doesn't change after we generate it, and we push that out, we deploy it to a system that's very robust and scalable. We don't have servers that are taking the request for the website at runtime. That right there eliminates a whole class of problems in terms of security, in terms of compliance. We don't have to manage servers or anything like that. We're deploying it to, battle-tested infrastructure. So in our case, this is, AWS, S3, and CloudFront, which is a CDN. In this case, if you didn't know, a CDN is a content distribution network, and what that does is it's sort of a layer, again, in front of the infrastructure that can cache content for folks, that adds a layer of security, that can make sure that our federal websites, that the information can get to the public without interruption. It can get there very quickly, which is especially important when folks are in bandwidth limited situations and so on. And these are all tools that both in the private sector and within government, folks are moving towards to make sure that we can get the content out quickly and reliably. Federalist is a platform that supports this style of development, and we'll talk a little bit more about what things you can do with this and maybe what things you can't do with this, because it is sort of a little bit more restrictive than a lot of folks are used to. It relies, Federalist and this workflow, this idea of the Jamstack relies heavily on source control tools. And so in our case, in GSA's case, we typically use GitHub, but a lot of the same things apply to other tools that are out there. And what this provides is this is not something that Federalist itself provides, but we integrate with GitHub. So if you're a federal agency, your code, your content is in your GitHub repository that you own and manage. Federalist does not manage that. It's transportable. So if you decided not to use Federalist, or use some other methodology, you have all of your code, it's in your account. And GitHub, and just like some of these other tools, provides a lot of workflow features on top of just posting code. So they allow us to know, hey, somebody changed their code, we can do something with that. So Federalist can pay attention to those sorts of events and can build your code, can deploy your website, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. We also, I will say, we also leverage GitHub is an enterprise tool. It has a lot of great features in terms of managing permissions and authorization for the repositories of code. And so we leverage that heavily and make sure that you have a good experience and you have enough control over your code and who has access to it in order to have the compliance requirements met. Okay, so this is just a little screenshot of Federalist itself to talk about the product. We say, hey, there's no easier way to build, launch, and manage government sites. I believe that. It is a great platform for getting up and running quickly, but also for managing this going forward. we have a lot of users right now. So this is probably maybe a little bit out of date. We probably have more than we're showing here, but plenty of .gov sites, a lot of different federal agencies, and a lot of visitors per year are using Federalist sites. So this is battle hardened, where we can handle a lot of traffic. That's not a problem. And we sort of, again, handle both. I need to iterate quickly. I need to get something up and running very quickly, but then I can also keep it here for the long term and make sure that it's secure, robust, can serve our users in the best way. Couple examples of some sites that are on Federalist right now. There are many more. These are particularly nice. Vote.gov, .gov, my favorite, and some other ones. So when you sign up for Federalist, what do you actually get? So we talked about the GitHub integration a little bit. So that happens once you're allowed to use Federalist. We will integrate with GitHub. And if your source code is there, we can pull that code and build that code and do what we need to do with it. We talked a little bit before about the infrastructure. We use AWS services behind the scenes, and in particular, we're actually built on cloud.gov, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But we're using those services that, again, are very resilient in the face of challenges. And we rely on those to provide the sort of service that our customers expect. We give you SSL out of the box. All of our sites are SSL and HTTPS. You don't have to manage that yourself. We have an ATO that covers, some of the technical characteristics of the system that can be leveraged by your agency depending on what you're trying to do. Very friendly support. I, of course, wouldn't be here without some other folks on the Federalist team, and so I will mention Amir and Eddie and Andrew, who have, Eddie and Amir in particular, who have been around Federalist a lot longer than I have and helped make it what it was. So they will always help you out whenever you need questions. And I think one of the big ones here is the last one, which is automatic preview builds. And so this is to help with this iteration process to make sure that we can get changes out to the public as fast as possible. What Federalist does is whenever you do make a code change, the Federalist system sees that code or content, I should say. If you make a content change, Federalist sees that, automatically rebuilds and deploys a version of your site with those changes that you can see immediately. And you can use that with your team, collaborate on that, make sure that everything looks good, and then continue and push that out to production. We'll see this a little bit when we get into the demo. We provide a dashboard to sort of view all of your sites and your builds within the application. I'll show you this when we demo, but you can see, again, you may have multiple projects within Federalist. You can see all of those here. You can see all of the builds and the logs from those builds for each of your websites. And then you can also get a link to the deployment of that site. And so, it's very common in a development workflow. You may have different versions of your site that people are working on all at the same time. Those are all available here. Those all have their own deployments, and you can view them side by side. To help people get started, we do provide some starter kits that include the United States Web Design System, search.gov, and the Digital Analytics Program integrations. This is part of what the idea is getting at in terms of centralized services and a lot of these tools playing together. So we give you this out of the box here as a good starter. The United States Web Design System is a package of layouts, HTML and CSS for your site that is 508 compliant out of the box. So that gives you a really good head start there. It has a lot of good, their documentation is fantastic in terms of not only just giving the details of how to use the tool, but why, what patterns you should follow when building your site. And so it's not just visually nice and not just giving you that 508 compliance out of the box, but also giving you good patterns to make sure that you're using plain language, or that you're communicating in a clear way, or that the color schemes are accessible for folks. from a variety of backgrounds. Search.gov is another one of those tools. It allows you to get an index of your site to make it easier for folks to search it, find what they're looking for. And then Digital Analytics program also gives you, part of what you get from something like Google Analytics, where you can track, hey, here are the people visiting my site. What browsers are they using? Where are they coming from? That sort of thing. And so we try to make it easy to do the right thing, to get on the right path to using all these tools by giving you a couple starters that have all these things in them to begin with. So how do you know if it's right for you? So GitHub, as I mentioned, is a requirement at this point, although if you're using another source code provider, that's something that we could look at expanding. Again, we provide a workflow for working quickly, getting feedback very quickly, seeing what's going on, seeing your changes right away. You get performance out of the box, and this is partly due to Federalist and partly due to the style of website that we're promoting here, this static site or this Jamstack site. By default, they're going to be very performant. There's no server you're interacting with at runtime. You don't like managing infrastructure, we do it for you. You don't have to worry about that. You just make the change to your code or your content. We handle the rest. The SSP, that's a system security plan, and oftentimes, I think depending on the type of work you're doing or your agency, it's going to depend. You still may have to create an SSP. You still may have to get your own authority to operate or ATO, but we can help with that. And in our case, Federalist itself is actually a FSMA low system. So if you do have other needs in terms of person identifying information, PII, or confidential information, or anything else that would make this not suitable for the type of information that you're putting into it, Federalist may not be right for you. But there are other options. There are certain cases that Federalist does not handle very well right now. The big one right now is user authentication. So if you have a site that you need to protect, behind some authentication, whether that's provided by a service like login.gov or something else, Federalist is not going to be a good option for you right now. And along with that, like the ability to show different content to different users. So again, like if you need a user to be logged in, you need to show them different content. Federalist may not be the right system for you. You need a server. So again, if you have specific requirements that need a running server, that maybe again like need to do user authentication or need to do some specific things that we can't handle that need to be done on the server side, Federalist may not be the right solution. But I have the answer to all of these things. In reality, is typically cloud.gov. Again, Federalist itself runs on cloud.gov. We'll talk about that a little bit more and what that means. But there's oftentimes, and we've seen this, the pathway where folks will start on Federalist and they realize that maybe they outgrow it a little bit, or they need a little bit more control over something, and they can sort of slide over to cloud.gov and can handle some of those more advanced use cases. I mentioned this a little bit, but what does it actually do? It's a tool that again manages this deployment process, this publishing process for you. So whenever you make a change to the content of your site, the code, some of the wording, whatever that is, once that gets to GitHub, so once that is pushed to GitHub, Federalist will see that, automatically build a preview of the site with all those updates in it. That includes your production site as well. So typically you may have different versions of your code. You may look at one version and say, yes, this looks great. I'm going to take those changes. I'm going to push them to the version of code that is my production site. Federalist will rebuild it and it'll be available to the public. So getting back to the 21st century idea and what does Federalist actually help with here? And I tried to bold the ones that I think we help with. We're not necessarily the entire solution to these things, but we help. Hey, we give you a way to modernize your website according to the list that was provided. It's a helpful way to digitize the services with a quick feedback loop. Makes it a little bit easier to do that. provides an improved customer experience, again, due not only to just the performance of the site, but also the speed with which you can iterate. So if there is a problem with the site, it's very quick to get that up and running and get those changes out. Excuse me for a second. We have a visitor who wanted to join. It allows you, we provide some of these integrations out of the box with the starter kit. So in terms of standardizing and transitioning to some of these shared services like search.gov, the digital analytics program, USWDS, we provide a pathway to using these things right away. And again, complying with standards. And so being 508 compliant, it's very important. USWDS gives you that out of the box. There's more work that you need to do there to maintain that. But again, we're trying to make the path here easy, to make it easy to take that path. So again, within this modernization, 508 compliance, making it searchable with search.gov. We are secure by default. As I said, HTTPS is provided by default. Again, this gives you a nice way to build user-centered sites, as you can react if there are issues and you can fix them right away. It's very customizable. At the end of the day, your site is your site. We don't put a lot of restrictions on the content or anything that can be there. And again, the performance characteristics of these types of site also makes it very mobile friendly. Okay. We talked a little bit about these friends already, but I'll put them down here. We're trying to, again, be part of this portfolio of products that all of our federal information systems can use to provide a good experience for our users. Search.gov, digital analytics, and USWDS. Talked a little bit about cloud.gov. I'll talk a bit more about that now. So cloud.gov is a platform for building applications. It's something that sits on top of something like Amazon Web Services, and so it's makes it a little bit easier to run applications, to provision databases, to provision some of these services without getting into the nitty-gritty of dealing with those platforms. It gives you a lot of security, the best practice security that you need out of those platforms in terms of managing credentials for all of those things. It makes it a lot easier to do those things. And again, supports a wider range of use cases than Federalist can. But again, Federalist is built on cloud.gov itself, and so we leverage a lot of those things already. One other thing that we talk about is something that we've been using with Federalist sites is Netlify CMS. So one of the ways that this workflow that we're talking about, where this Jamstack site where you have your code and your content all lives in GitHub, but you want folks to be able to make changes to that content, and those folks may not be technical. It may not be feasible for them to interact with Git or GitHub in a way that a software developer might. You want a user interface, a website that they can go to change that content. Netlify CMS is actually one of many options where it gives you a website, a user interface that you can use to update, create content for your site. And that content, again, is stored in GitHub as it is right now. And again, because of the way it works, when you make a change in the content via the Netlify CMS UI, that change ends up in GitHub. Federalist sees that change and will produce a preview of your site. So it is an open source tool. We sort of make the path easy to use it. It's up to you. I think there are other open source tools out there that also do a similar thing, or maybe even some non-open source ones that provide this sort of GitHub-backed content management system. And there are more. I think that the key here is that this is a flexible platform. We try to, again, get you on the rails of making these things easy and accomplishing these goals by out of the box sort of showing you, hey, this is how you use search.gov or DAP or USWDS or Netlify CMS, whatever that is, but it's not limited to that. If there are other tools that sort of fit with this workflow, we can help you use those as well. So before getting into a demo, I can pause a little bit to see if there are any questions or comments. I haven't seen too many in the chat. Let's see, I have a question. So the accessibility, like in terms of the 508 accessibility, which is I'm guessing what you're talking about, has more to do with the USWDS components than Federalist itself. So they are going to give you those components that are going to work okay with, you know, with screen readers or with folks with low vision or anything else. Those are the tools that are going to help with that. The part of that that actually helps in terms of accessibility with Federalist, the platform, it's more in terms of the performance characteristics of the sites, and so that they are fast because they are static, which means again people in low bandwidth environments or on their mobile phone should be able to use those sites. That said, it's up to the user, the developer, to make sure that site functions in those environments as well. So again, USWDS helps with that, but it's still going to be up to the developer to make sure that they stay within those constraints and they continue to follow through with that. We have some guidance on that. I think you'll find more guidance at USWDS website. I have a link, I think, at the end of the presentation, but we can also share that as well. They have a lot of guidance and tools around, hey, how do you make things accessible? How do you make things 508 compliant? It can point you in the right direction. I actually don't know about Netlify CMS, and that's a great question. I'm not totally sure, and that's something that we should check. It is, again, it's an option, and it's not something that we create or that we manage. It's just an open source tool, but it is a concern, especially again, this is a federal system, and even though that's typically meant for internal users of the system, it should be a goal for that to also be 508 compliant. Let's see, we got another question. So it's a little bit mixed. It can be, so the question is about an agency that may not have software developers on staff. I think at the end of the day, this is still a platform where you need somebody to build the site. So it is not a platform that gives you a site builder, like a visual site builder or anything like that. You still have to build the site. We have users at varying levels of technical experience, and it depends. You know, you have the starter, which gives you an out of the box. It gives you some layouts. It gives you some places to put content, and you can have some success just kind of changing those to your needs. But most of the time, you're going to still want some sort of software developer support to make sure you can build the site that you want. We don't provide that sort of work out of the box with Federalist. Okay, so let's jump into a quick demo, and we'll demo the functionality of Federalist, and I'll try to show you pieces of the platform as well. This is, if you can't see my screen or if you're still in the presentation, let me know. Otherwise, what you should be seeing is the Federalist website. From here, if you are able to, once you're approved to use Federalist, you'll be able to manage your sites. And I have a bunch of sites. Before here, we'll kind of go through the process of creating your own. So if you come in here for the first time, you'll see an empty list, and you'll choose Add Site. You have the option of, if you have an existing GitHub repository, you can put in the URL to that repository here, and we'll grab that and integrate it with Federalist. Or if you're starting from scratch, which a lot of our users do, you can use one of our templates. So we talked about the starters that have USWDS that have some of this stuff, and that's how we're going to start. So I'm going to choose the Jekyll template. Let's see. And we'll create, I'm just giving it a name. And Federalist is going to create a new site from that template for us, and then it's going to start the build of that site. And so here what we can see is we're seeing the builds, all the builds for our site. This is the first build, it's queued. If I refresh it, we'll eventually start building. At the same time, we can actually view the repository that it created. We created DigitalGov talk. Okay, so this is the GitHub repository. So this has all of the code that was created from the starter repository. And this would typically live in your organization, in your repository, whatever you want. It does let you know that you generated it from this Federalist template. And you can always look back there to see any documentation or to see any updates that have been made. The starters do have a fairly extensive set of documentation to start with that talks about the tools that are used in the starter, the functionality that it provides, and we don't need to go through all of this now, but it's fairly extensive in terms of how you configure this and what it's going to do. So in the meantime, I suppose this is what happens whenever you do a live demo. So it's still queued. So I'm not sure if we're waiting on a bunch of other builds or if there's another issue happening. But in the meantime, what we can do is we can look at one that is already set up and has builds. And so what you would typically see is, if I go back to Federalist and I view some of our other sites, we would see a bunch of builds that look like this. And so when the build is successful, I can view the logs for that build. And so this is going to be very similar to the logs that you'd see if you were to build this locally. This is running all the steps that you would need to do to build your site. And this again depends on, typically you're using a tool that's called like a static site generator that would again take the content that you have and build a website out of it. You can also just use plain HTML and CSS if you want to. The key here is that when you build the site, when it's successful, you automatically get a link to preview the resulting site. And so this is actually, this is going to look identical to the repository that I created. This is straight from the template, and this is sort of the site that you get out of the box. This is a very typical layout from the United States web design system in turn with some sort of basic content to explain where things go. Has a few different templates here depending on what you're trying to do. So, get some documentation, some navigation, and so on. So let me check and see how we're doing. Okay, so apparently we're having a problem, which is always what happens when you do a live demo, but life is not without risk, unfortunately. So where we're going to be a little bit blocked here, I'm not going to try to debug what's happening, but suffice to say, what you'll end up getting again is a list of builds. What I intended to do was to then actually go into GitHub and show you what happens when you actually make a change. What you would see there immediately once you make that change would be another entry here, another build that would kick off. It would take a few minutes, and then we'd be able to actually see those changes on a live website immediately after doing that. So it's unfortunate that that's happening. It worked, of course, before the talk, and I did not have issues. So I will blame Zoom Gov or some other nefarious actor here in case that came here. So unfortunately, it didn't work. Beyond Federalist, we talked a little bit about some of these other tools, but basically we talked a bit about Netlify CMS. This again is a tool to build on top of GitHub and to allow folks who aren't as technically savvy to make content changes to your site. It's an open source repository. I think there was a great point in the chat about making sure that Netlify CMS itself is 508 compliant. But again, there are other tools that you could also use with your Federalist site. We don't limit you there. Netlify CMS itself, again, builds off of this approach where your content is in GitHub. You can write this content and just sort of mark down, which is a very simple format that turns into HTML. It's very similar to plain text. You have some other configuration that again is human readable, and you're using a generator to build your site from this set of content. I won't get into too much of those details. Talked a bit about cloud.gov. Again, Federalist is built on cloud.gov. We are a part of cloud.gov. organizationally. When Federalist doesn't meet your needs, if you have some more advanced use cases, then you could probably do it there. So it's a great thing. If Federalist checks most of the boxes, maybe not everything, check out cloud. Again, when you need a server or you need direct access to some of the other tools that we use, for instance, when we operate our sites, such as databases, caching, storage, that sort of thing. Or if you do have other needs that you need to move to a system that can handle FSMA moderate information, cloud.gov can handle that as well, and Federalist cannot. So there are some other solutions here to sort of working with this style of website. We talked about, having all of your content and everything in one GitHub repository. That's not strictly required. Because there's a build process that runs to create your sites, which is up to you, and you control that. You can effectively do what you want or get your data from other sources. So a lot of times agencies, maybe they have a WordPress site, or they have a Drupal site, or some other content management system, and the content all lives there. Maybe they want to refresh the look and feel of their site. Maybe they want to have the sort of iteration that you can do with Federalist. You can still use those tools. A lot of those tools provide APIs for accessing the data that's in them, and you can build a site in Federalist that actually pulls that data during the build time from those other systems and creates your site from that. You can also use just plain HTML and CSS, JavaScript. You don't have to have a fancy build. You can hand code it, do it the old-fashioned way. The starters, in addition to having the digital analytics program, also have some code to get you started with Google Analytics. If you need extra analytics there, a lot of agencies use both and more. As I said, it's a flexible platform. You can look at integrating all sorts of tools with it. And if there's something that you have questions about or not sure how to do, let us know. We're always there to help. And with that, I'll open up the floor a little bit more to questions. I see a couple other things in the chat here. Michelle's question, let's see, of Gallatin. I don't know what that is, so I'm guessing the answer is no. But feel free to reach out, and I can look into that a little more to see, if that's something that we could support. I don't know what it is, so I'd have to look. But yeah, that is all. Are there other questions about Federalist, about cloud.gov, or any of the surrounding tools or the ecosystem that I can answer right now?
David, looks like a question came in through the chat.
Yeah, so we do have, and one of the things I wanted to show, so we do have fairly extensive documentation on Federalist itself. So a lot of this documentation, while they may not be videos or things like that, will show how to get started and maybe some screenshots and walk you through the process. So there's a lot of documentation here, not only just on getting started with Federalist or using particular tools on Federalist, such as Jekyll or Node or some of these other programming languages that I won't get into in too much detail, but there's a lot of documentation there. So this is the first place to go in terms of, hey, can I do this thing, or how do I do this thing? We've got pretty good documentation. Our documentation is, like everything, part of Federalist is open source. So if there are changes that should be made or improvements, we can take issues or pull requests. We can push those up and improve the documentation if they're not, if it's not helpful as well. All right. Oh, robust. I'm not sure how many of those I can show. Somebody asked about examples. I think, maybe Yeah, so thank you for putting in the documentation. I'm not totally sure if I can show examples. I have one in particular that I could show that's been very high visibility. I don't know if I can show it or not. I don't know if, trying to see who is here. I'll wait and see if anybody chances. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, this is Kara Reinsel. I'm the product manager for cloud.gov, and cloud.gov's website Federalist as well. So if folks want to check that out, that is a Federalist site.
Cloud.gov is a Federalist site. The Federalist documentation site is a Federalist site. We do have many public customers. Again, I'm just not sure if I should be sharing that in this environment. But reach out to us after the talk, and we can see what we can show you. And in order to do that, here are the websites, federalist.18f.gov. Again, a little bit of a legacy here from how it started with an 18f, cloud.gov. Any inquiries about the platform can come into federalist-inquiries@gsa.gov, and that'll get handled by our team. I'm not sure, Kara, the intake email if they're more interested in cloud.gov, but the team will handle both. Yeah, and I look forward to handling more questions. And please, if there's anything that I didn't get to, follow up here, and we can get back to you and answer any of those questions that you may have.
Thanks, David. That was awesome. This event will be posted in the upcoming days to the event page, and we actually have a survey that we will also be sending out right after the event. And if no one has any other questions, I think that's it. So have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job. Awesome.